Kjo është Klik Plus. Si që paralajmëruam tonën, sot me neve është ambasadori I Bashkimit Evropian në Shkup, ambasador Deјvid Gir, me cilin do të flasim në anglisht dhe ju do shihni për këtë. Welcome, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be on Click Plus.
I really appreciate your time, sir, in this, I might call it difficult times, because none of us knows exactly what will happen. And the first and foremost question, what news you may have that we don't on the constitutional changes? Do we have the 80 MPs that we need for that?
I don't have any inside information on where the Parliament stands. I mean, obviously we're following very closely the developments. The constitutional changes, you know, it's a big issue. It's a sovereign question.
Absolutely.
For the country to decide. But I think there are a number of elements which I think will be important once the text of the proposal is published and is available to the staff, to people in general, that is taken into account. I would first of all start maybe on the if I may, on the constitutional change, as you've opened the issue. I think there's a question of timing and context, first of all. As you know, last year in July, we opened accession negotiations with North Macedonia. And since then, the process is going well. The screening is underway. Your teams are very well organized. And I can see good, positive development. So there is a momentum.
All right.
But even bigger than that, there is a broader context where, as a result, sadly, of Russia's war against Ukraine, there's been an intensification of the momentum on enlargement and understanding the seriousness about the interests of moving forward on enlargement for the European Union. And so I see this as a moment of great opportunity. At the moment, the door is open. With these changes to the constitution, this country would then move to the next step with no further veto, no further decision to be taken. So it's a sovereign decision, but there is a moment of great opportunity and great risk.
Should not be missed.
Should not be missed, and risk if you don't move forward. And after all, it will be important also that people have a look at what's actually published. What is the text itself, and focus on that. And it seems to be ways to include people who self-identify as Bulgarian within the constitution. You already have a good record in inter-ethnic relations.
Yes.
And this would consolidate that. In fact, you could even argue it's more or less making explicit what is already implicit within your constitution.
But let me stop at what you just said. You said, at the moment, the door is open. You said it exactly. What does that at the moment, can you be more specific on it? If we lose the chance that by the end of the year, during this summer, we make all ready, and hopefully we might have the constitutional change, because as of now, we don't see the 80 MPs having the 2/3 of the parliament. If we lose this chance, what does that, can you interpret what that at the moment means?
I think,
mean it closes the door, the EU closes the door, we might lose a decade, as our government is saying, or the opposition say, well, it's not the end of the world, for instance.
I think, as I say, there's a moment of opportunity here.
Okay.
There's a momentum. And you know, momentum in politics, momentum in diplomacy is something you don't throw away. It's a really special moment. So by moving forward, you can take that momentum and you can take the opportunities that arise and move decisively forward on the EU accession path, focusing now on the big questions of the reforms that need to be put in state. Now, what happens if the country doesn't take that step and decides not to make the constitutional changes? I see it as this, that at that point, the process would hold. It would stop there, the screening would stop there, and there would be no further advances on the negotiations themselves.
Yes.
Which would then mean that you are missing that opportunity, and others in time would also move forward and seize this moment, I think, to approach the European Union.
Is there any timeline that you may give to the public opinion in case we lose this momentum, this opportunity?
I mean, I don't want to speculate.
You don't want. You still believe that we might change it. That's good. I'm not the only optimist here.
It's a decision for Parliament. I mean, you know, it's important to focus on the arguments, to look at the big picture, and then make a sovereign choice. What I would say is this, is that there are risks as well by postponing until after elections. First of all,
we're going to talk about that.
There is a political moment now, as I say.
Why lose it?
That you could lose that political moment. The second risk is that the issue can become increasingly complex as different groups are putting on different proposals for changing the constitution.
All right.
And I also am concerned that we should not have a very polarizing election in which this issue becomes increasingly difficult to address. What I would say, two things I would shoot down straight away. One is the idea that a better deal can be negotiated with Bulgaria after elections. I followed extremely closely the negotiations over 2 years, very difficult.
You say it's true or it's false?
Sorry?
Is it true or false that we might end up renegotiating it?
I can't see that happening.
You can't see that. So it's false then?
I believe that I can't see it happening. I believe that the deal that was agreed is the best deal that could be achieved. It's a compromise. It's not perfect. No compromise is, but it's the best deal.
And whatever government comes after the elections, if we don't make it, they will have the same deal to deal with.
Whatever government the people
That's
decide,
explained to the opposition.
whatever government the people decide to put in place, I can't see a better deal being negotiated. The second point is, I don't see the possibilities of some kind of guarantees coming from the European Union, which is sometimes mentioned. I don't see that as a way forward either. The best guarantees for moving forward in this process will be the reforms themselves.
Can you explain me when this is VMROs. I mean, we heard Mr. Mickoski, we heard the members of the parliament and their political structure saying we want guarantees. They want it from the Germans, the German government, sorry, I don't want to sound politically incorrect, from the American administration as well. They want guarantees. What is exactly guarantee? What do they tell you, sir? What does it mean? They want something in paper? They want to shake hands with a senior official from the EU or any foreign government to say, what is it?
The idea of guarantees in themselves in the enlargement process, they don't exist because there are many different steps that need to be taken forward, and for each of those steps you require the member states to agree to move forward. But the experience of the past is this, that where you have difficult issues such as this, and we have a solution to this issue so we can move forward, once you begin to move forward, once you focus on the reforms, then this issue fades away and the real questions are addressed, which are about the reforms in all of these fundamental areas which affect people's daily lives.
Do you find helpful the messages that you hear from your colleagues, diplomats that come in and out in Skopje more recently nowadays because we have a deadline to meet? Are they clear enough for the opposition? Because the main issue now, the main obstacle is that the opposition from VMRO says no to the constitution. Is it enough, sir?
I think first
are you being clear enough? I mean, to the VMRO, very frankly, I'm asking you, you talked about the guarantees. We're going to talk about as well about the stamp, the European stamp that VMRO argues about it. You said it publicly, everyone says is that regardless who comes and who wins the elections, if we don't make it this year, you know, it will be the same deal, so why lose time?
First of all, as I say, these messages are not just to a party, but to the population as a whole, because ultimately it affects...
But it's only VMRO who argues against it.
Well, it affects everybody, so it's a public debate, and that's an important thing, that there should be an open public debate. This is why programs like this are very welcome.
Absolutely.
I think what our duty is, first of all, to respect that there is a sovereign decision, which I repeat, as you picked up, but also to point out the bigger picture, as I say, the risks and the opportunities that exist at the moment, and the danger that by not moving forward at this stage, the country is left behind. And certainly not what I would want to see.
None of us.
I think that's really where we are. But also to ask people to look carefully at what's actually being proposed in terms of the constitutional amendments themselves. They do not appear to affect the national interest or the sovereignty of the country.
Is the ruling coalition doing enough in showing what they really mean by constitutional changes? By law, the PR campaigns are forbidden by the government, by law. So they can't do it in the media, which that's why I'm asking you. Do you see that they have done enough to show, besides us, the private medias who want to see this happen because we know the agreement, but the government as such, is it doing enough to telling the people, not just the opposition, which they can't convince to vote pro the changes?
I mean, I'm not going to comment on what the government should or should not do. I think in a situation like this, of course, it is important
But it takes two for tango, the government and the opposition.
No, two different things. One, first of all, public debate. It's important in situations like this that you have a good public debate across the country.
I understand.
And that everybody should be engaged in that. And secondly, there's actually a much bigger issue here, which you're kind of hinting at, which is about political polarization. Because we're in a difficult situation now, there are differences of views between the parties, but we've also seen in the past years, Parliament blocked, a failure to move forward. And yet, almost all the political parties agree that the EU perspective, joining the European Union, is a must, and that reforms need to be undertaken. Now, the only way the country is going to get there is if the parties can, while being different, having different political platforms, can agree on the essential EU reforms and then can take them forward, whichever government is in power after elections. We've seen that in Croatia, we've seen that in many member states. It's only by having unity and mutual understanding, coming together on that key policy agenda, that you can ensure the country moves fast enough to join the European Union.
Okay. We've seen the president of the Eurodepone, Mr. Mickoski, recently getting out of the premises of the offices, as we call it, the EU House in Skopje. Is there anything that, by chance, we may know that you have told Mr. Mickoski?
You make it sound like there's some very
like
secret
really
or something shocking.
KGB, CIA thing.
No, we meet regularly with the leaders of different political parties. We have, I think, open, frank and constructive discussions with everyone. That's part of our job. We explain how we see things in the way I'm talking to you now, and we have an exchange of views. That's normal.
And what about the arguments? Do you think that Mr. Mickoski has real strong arguments that the European Union cannot really...
I mean, that's for Mr. Mickoski to
No,
explain.
I mean, that's your opinion.
From my perspective, I think it's clear what I'm saying is that it's important to look at the big picture, look at where we are in the world, look at the interests of the country. We need to move forward.
But the people are interested to know about the identity, about the language, Macedonia. These are the ones that we hear from Mr. Mickoski. It's not that he's saying we are against Europe. We heard him. We had him on our show. He was like, I'm the biggest pro-European in the country.
Yeah, I want to talk to people generally. I'm not addressing myself to Vimro or to others, but on identity and language, two key issues which you mentioned. On the language, I mean, the language, the Macedonian language, without qualification is in the negotiating framework, which means it is the basis of our negotiations with the European Union. Your negotiations with the European Union.
Indeed.
Which means that the Macedonian language will become a language of the European Union. And we see that from the experience of other countries, that the fact of joining the European Union has strengthened the language, whether as a result of having a whole army of interpreters and translators, but also more focus on the language. And on identity, no country loses its identity on the way to the European Union. Again, the experience of the 27 member states is that the identities of those countries are very much strengthened as a result of being part of the European Union. Indeed, our motto, as you know, is united in diversity. So that's part of that common issue.
And does Mr. Mickoski listen to your arguments when you tell them?
I'm not going to go into sharing my discussions with different
but this is exactly what we lack in the public opinion, because we can't hear any diplomat or any senior foreign official who tells us exactly, we told Mr. Mickoski, this is not an argument. We told Mr. Mickoski, this is not what is going to happen. You shouldn't be telling the public and polarizing much more. Because now we're going back to Mr. Gruevski's time, when no one ever said anything about Mr. Gruevski, but everyone listened to him.
I think we share our views on all of these issues with all political players, but not just them, with the media, with civil society and with people. I travel around the country, very regularly, and when we go to different towns, I meet the mayor, I meet the council, but we also have a very nice session where we have citizens coming in and we have exchanges like this. Town hall sessions, they're actually one of the most enjoyable things. People are not frightened to express their views, they do, and I express them back. And that's the kind of conversation that we have with everyone.
And what's the feedback? Because I think certainly ask you about the language, about
a lot of feedback. People will do everything from talking about local issues, which they're very frustrated about, through to big questions like the ones you've mentioned on identity, like what guarantees, like the future in the European Union. The most important thing is, so they say, it's great to have the opportunity to talk and air views. That's why those town hall meetings are important. That's why Click Plus is important.
Absolutely, Sam. We share the same view. We hear the government, to be more specific now, we hear the government, first things first, whom is in charge? Who is your counterpart from Macedonian side? Is it Mr. Kovacevski, the one who needs to deal with, or is it Mr. Maricic, or is it Mr. Butuic, or is it President? I want from you, I want to hear it from you.
I think it's very clear that the head of the government is Prime Minister Kovacevski, and we of course deal with different ministers depending on their specific.
But he's the man in charge. Is he to blame if he doesn't, if the country doesn't make it? Not just him, it's not just the Prime Minister who wants to see the Constitution, but the public opinion as well. Is he the one to blame if he doesn't make it, sir?
If he doesn't make what?
If we don't make it the 80 MPs by the end of November.
Look, the responsibility lies on all political parties. Of course,
but if he's in charge?
He's in charge of the government. This is a decision, the way in which, and it's normal, a change to a constitution, it's normal that it requires a majority more than the simple majority of a government. Most countries have that. So the responsibility lies on all of the politicians to take responsibility and to make the decisions which they think are right for the future of the country.
Is it Mr. Mickoski to blame if we don't make it?
As I say, it's a responsibility of all politicians to look at
you
the
can never
big
be
picture.
undiplomatic on this case.
I mean, my
you
job,
can't.
you know, I'm trying to be open with you, and I'm trying to say clearly that responsibility.
But when they hear us and when they watch us, they will say, if Mr. Kovacevski is in charge, but he didn't make it, and Mr. Mickoski has the 44 MPs, but they don't vote because they have signed that they won't vote, then who is, I mean, we are the ones which are not politicians, members of the parliament, which are going to suffer the consequences. That's very honest.
All politicians have responsibilities to make the best decisions that they can for the country and looking at the country's medium to long-term future.
And those who don't make, they're working against the interest of the country?
I'm not going to comment on that. I mean, it's a matter for individual MPs. It's good questions, but it's a matter for individual MPs to make. But what I am saying is that, you know, the opportunity is there now. The risks are very clear. So it's now for Parliament, once they're presented with the proposals, to decide how to act.
It's been a year, actually not a year, since the agreement, 6 months or so, that we hear the government, we have 80, we have the votes for the constitutional changes. Just recently we had the Vice Prime Minister, Mr. Van der said, yes, we do have the 80. Have you been notified by anyone from the government they really do have 80, or it's just talk the talk from the government, like in every country? I'm not saying that we are different from any country in the world.
I'm no more informed on the details of who is going to vote which way than you are. But I mean, I'm just aware of the intention to move this forward now to Parliament soon.
Is there any way that the international community, the European Union mainly, can accommodate VMRO's requests in any way, shape or form, sir? They have 3 requests, you know that. And they even want to push much more the early elections, but you talked about it. You said, regardless if they happen or we don't have, they're going to have the same exact agreement and which they need to stick to and make the constitutional changes. Is there any way, shape or form that we might see the European Union making a compromise to accommodate the VMRO? Since we hear them, they're not moving from the position. That's what I want to understand. Did you give them the clear message? No, we cannot do this. Yes, we might do this, for instance.
So first of all, the internal politics of agreements between government and opposition and how to move forward is a matter for them. For the EU, what we said is we've opened negotiations.
Yep.
Next step, holding of what we call an intergovernmental conference, requires this change to the constitution. That's the deal on the table. There's no other deal. That's the deal. So it's in North Macedonia's hand. There is no possibility of veto in this step. There's no possibility of a further decision. The decision is already taken. If the change is made, then we move forward.
And if not, then we got to...
We would stay there.
It's very sad when I hear from you. It's very sad that we might have... At the end of the day, we, as every country, we depend on the politicians, but we try to understand if there is any room for any compromises whatsoever between the European Union and the VMRO, and you say Yes.
Well, I
or
don't
no?
think it's about compromise between the EU and
But they didn't
Vimro.
ask. They didn't. Mr. Mitskovsky didn't ask Mr. Kovachevsky any guarantees. You heard that. I mean, he was asking you. He was asking Mr. Varhey, Mr. Sarazan when he was here. All.
What we have is an agreement that was reached. There was a bilateral agreement between Bulgaria and North Macedonia. Now the country should deliver on that bilateral agreement in the sense of the change to the constitution. And it's for the EU then to deliver, to make sure that we are helping you on the path towards the EU through reforms and making sure that bilateral issues and other questions do not come into that process.
So even in these difficult times, when we have the war in Ukraine, the invasion of Ukraine, not the war in Ukraine, but the invasion of Ukraine, you're telling us that EU cannot make any compromises.
The whole agreement was a compromise that was made to allow things to move forward. We are very invested. We want to see this country in the European Union. We think this country can make a good contribution to the EU and will be more prosperous, safer and secure, as will the EU if you join us. But the path forward is really, and this is where the real difficult stuff comes, the path is about reforms, undertaking those steps which are necessary to ensure that when you join, you're not a factor of instability, and also that you can really benefit from being part of that.
If we talk regional-wise, do you see any threat from the neighboring countries? We have now the violence which erupted 10 days ago in the north of Kosovo and which affected the stability. We have an increase of peacekeeping forces in the NATO mission in KFOR in Kosovo. And so do you see any risk from the neighborhood that might impact whatsoever the whole region or Macedonia as well?
On the issue of Kosovo-Serbia, we've been very, very clear.
Okay.
We have condemned in the strongest terms the violence. Okay. We've called upon Kosovo and Serbia to de-escalate, to end the divisive rhetoric and uncoordinated actions. We've called on Kosovo to take no escalatory action, to make sure that it stops the police patrols in close to the municipalities in North Kosovo. The mayors concerned not to, for temporarily, not to be in the municipal buildings there, but also very importantly that there should be as soon as possible early elections in those 4 municipalities, and those elections should be inclusive, and that Serb Kosovars should participate in them. There is a need for calm, and so of course we're following very closely. More generally, what we're saying is both Kosovo and Serbia need to come to the EU facilitated dialogue in order to find a sustainable solution.
Any impact whatsoever? Regional-wise, Macedonia-wise?
I mean, of course, we follow this always very, very closely. I don't see an impact directly on this country.
As a security terms or whatsoever, no?
I don't see an impact on this country, but we follow, of course, very closely. It is very important for peace and security generally that both sides come together within the facilitated dialogue and seek a sustainable solution.
Serbia as such, how do you see it in its approach to the European Union, sir? Because I would, to understand it better.
Serbia is a negotiating partner in this process, as you are. It has advanced in many different chapters. It still needs to advance in others as well. We have also, of course, had concerns in the area of the common foreign and security policy, particularly related to sanctions.
With Russia, to Russia.
Exactly, vis-à-vis Russia. And we want to see it advancing more. And of course, part of that process is to ensure the achievement of a process of normalization with Kosovo.
With Kosovo as such. Which one, Serbia or North Macedonia, has a bigger challenge ahead of himself? I'm very interested to know your opinions.
I mean, they're very different.
Sanctions, Kosovo issue, there's plenty of...
There are very different issues, but I look at this country in the following way.
Okay.
First of all, it's a small country, so the scale is not as difficult as sometimes you hear, we'll never join the European Union. It's all impossible. It's all a pipe dream. It's not. It is achievable. We've seen that with Croatia. We've seen that with many other countries. And I see this country as having achieved a certain level of reform, by far not enough, but in some areas quite advanced, in others much more to be done. But if this country focuses on the reform agenda, bringing together across the political divide, it can achieve and can rapidly move forward and join the European Union. It's a question of political determination and political will. And for me, that's where the public debate really needs to be, about what are the reforms and why are the reforms not moving fast enough.
But who does better? Who has bigger challenges, Serbia or North Macedonia?
I mean, I think you need to consult the country reports. We had these.
That's the country report from your point of view, because people we might want to hear as well, giving all right, this is a lot what Macedonia has to do. We do cherish it, as each and every one of you says. But you have Serbia too, which has to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 steps, which are different challenges from yours, but as well very problematic.
No, Serbia has many different challenges, which are set out. We produce, as you know, every year a country report, which goes through every single sector and says what they need to do. Now,
but your opinion, whose challenges are more?
Well, obviously Serbia has opened chapters and is more advanced in the process. So, it is further along the line. But it does have significant challenges in certain areas, including in the common foreign and security policy, which it will need to address in order to advance further, and in the rule of law as well. But I think, you have different challenges, but the scale here, I think, makes it a process which is very achievable.
What is your answer to the arguments that we hear from the opposition and from many, unfortunately I say many, in the public opinion from the civil sector, that, that we have double standards by the European Union vis-à-vis countries which want to adhere and integrate in the European Union? Does the EU have any double standards with North Macedonia, compared to Croatia when it first entered, Slovenia, Greece, Bulgaria, Romania?
Okay. I mean, first of all, to say the EU is an evolving organization. There's a tendency to see the EU as some kind of monolith which has always been the same. It is 27 member states, it is changing, it is evolving, and what we've seen in the last 2 years in response to Russia's war against Ukraine has shown remarkable development. So it is a moving and living and breathing and developing organization. But what we try to do is apply the same methodology to all of the countries, the candidate countries. And that methodology, which was revised under the French presidency. Is designed to set out clear criteria for what needs to be done. So just to be very practical about it, you've started a process of screening. And as I say, it's going well. So literally what is happening is we're looking at every area of activity, from agriculture to trade, from customs to rule of law, health, education, all of them. We look at the laws that exist, but we know that's not enough, because laws exist, but are they implemented?
They need to implement them.
Right. Who's implementing them? Do you have the institutions?
And who's not implementing them?
And if they're not being implemented, how do you enforce it? And so it's a very detailed picture that we get at the end of the process of what needs to be done, including in some key areas like the rule of law, a roadmap.
Okay.
And all of these will set out exactly the steps that need to be taken, the reforms that need to be taken in order to bring the country into the EU. And whether that's in the area of judiciary or any of the other areas that I've covered. So it's very practical. But we don't just leave it there. We don't just say, okay, there you are, there's it, get on with it. We provide you very substantial support through financial and technical support to help you on the way.
And we really do appreciate it.
And at the same time, what you have is you see huge investment in the country as the perspective for the country as a member becomes clearer, so the foreign direct investment increases, because it's clear this is a good access point to the European single market, currently 450 million people, the biggest game in town.
What about the double standards? Because you talked about the procedure, and you didn't answer the question.
I don't see double standards in that sense.
Well, if you say that you've reformed, from what we heard you, if we say during the French presidency, indeed, we have a different approach towards the member candidates, but is it more difficult, or is it different from the time when Bulgaria, Romania, Croatia, Slovenia entered the EU, and now the present days when we want to join the EU?
I think the whole revised methodology is about
Yes.
learning from the experience of the past, what worked best.
But is it different or not?
It has changed a bit, yes.
Is it more than it used to be?
It's more there's more flexibility in it.
Well, flexibility, is it more criteria, more too demanding than it used to be?
I think in certain areas it's more rigorous, like such as in the fundamentals, you see, because now we say very clearly that in what we call the fundamentals, which is the rule of law, public administration reform, etc., in those areas, what we do now is we look at the process, how you're doing in every single step of the way, from day one until the day before you join. So I think there's a increased rigor and focus in those areas. But there are also new elements such as accelerated integration, which offer the possibilities of new benefits perhaps earlier on in the process. So it has, positive elements to it as well. And I also regard the focus on the fundamentals as a positive, because you have major issues, you know that, in the area of the rule of law here, and citizens suffer as a result. And so by putting a focus on this, by saying you need to do these reforms in the interests of your citizens, but also to get to the EU, this is of general public benefit. The same with the fight against corruption.
Last but not least, because unfortunately, I'm saying we are recording this interview prior to the meeting of Mr. Kovachevsky with Mr. Mitskovsky. So I would want to know, is there anything that you hope that may come out from the meetings?
I mean, we always welcome meetings between
Me too,
different...
but any outcome?
We always welcome meetings between different political players, key individuals like this. I think, again, what we really want to see, I'm not suggesting from this meeting, but what we really want to see is that the political parties coming together on a common understanding of what the EU reforms are and a common commitment on them. Doesn't mean that they have to be on the same government.
Of course.
They can have their differences, but that they turn their commitments to the EU future into clear acts in legislation and enforcement.
Let's hope we'll see at least an agreement, or per se, rather than words, in deeds and acts from both sides. And I have to thank you for being our guest, sir.
Thank you.
A great honor. Too diplomatic, I have to say, too diplomatic.
I'm a diplomat, but I hope
it was very difficult to get into the other side, because based on your position, I really respect that.
I think the key message I wanted to pass, though, was that the road to the EU is practical and achievable, and there is an opportunity now to move forward.
If there is will and acts to act upon, which we don't see.
That's on your side to deliver.
Yeah, it's always on our side. Sir. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it, Mr. Ambassador. Zonja dhe zotrin ishim ambasadorin e Bashkimit Evropian në Shkup, zotrin Deјvид Gir, për të pa dhe për dëgju se sot, nesër dhe pas një kohe, mund të kemi apo jo ndryshim të një kushtetutë në bazë të numrave që na donë. Ju duke ju falënderuar për vëmendje, shihemi të hënë. Mirëmbëjtje. Thank you very much, sir. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Fatih.
Thank you very much.